to Flatten Your Fear Online Summit. This is going to be such an exciting time. We are starting our first round of 22 interviews with some amazing people. And this is all about getting you past your fears so you can experience the life you were designed for. And I couldn't open this summit better than with somebody who I admire and I've been watching for a while. Damon West, welcome to the summit.
Elizabeth, thank you for having me today. You have given me a chance to be useful, and we're going to talk about the story today. But when they interviewed me for parole back in 2015 and said, hey, if you could be remembered for being anything in this life, she said, give it to me in just one word, go. And because I was a coffee bean and because I've worked around my fears, I knew what that one word was, and it was useful. So thank you for letting me be useful today.
Well, you are certainly useful and purposeful in so many things, and we only have 30 minutes. I don't even know how to unpack your life, but we're going to try.
How are we going to do this?
I don't know, but it's going to be amazing. And anyone who doesn't know you must be on Mars. But for those who don't, Damon is a motivational speaker, and he is an author of The Change Agent, which is about his life, and then The Coffee Bean, which of course was groundbreaking. He wrote that with John Gordon. We're going to get into all of that. But before we start, I want to read you something from your book, The Change.
Go for it.
So this book for me was so amazing to read. I need everyone to go out and get it, but I want to read something that will set us up for this interview. This is what you wrote in the beginning of the book. It's my hope that my story can be a warning to those who need it, a message of hope for those who are looking for it, and a tribute to the awesome power of faith. So that is, in a nutshell, what I believe as I look at you as a motivational individual out there. It seems like that's what you bring to the world. So let's dive in. Let's talk about who Damon West is, how fear has shown up in your life. Let's tell your story so people can understand the odds that you have overcome, and they can see that they too can push through some of these unbelievable things. So let's start with the young Damon West.
Well, the young Damon West. So I grew up in a town called Port Arthur, Texas. And Port Arthur is down where Louisiana and Texas meet on the Gulf Coast of Texas. It's a predominantly African-American town, blue-collar town, refinery town. But I came from great parents. I tell people all the time, I had a privileged and very good upbringing. My parents, for example, have been married 52 years. They just celebrated their 52nd anniversary in June last month. And so my parents have been married for forever, it feels like. And my mom was a school teacher, then she became a registered nurse, and she was all about service to others. My father was a sports writer for 50 years, but he wasn't just any sports writer. He was the first sports writer in this part of Texas to put black athletes on the front page of a sports page. And
Awesome.
It was 1971 was the first time he did those. I mean, if people, they broke his windows, they slid his tires, they did all that because he put a black athlete on the front page. So my parents were thrusted into civil rights at an early age, right? 4 years before I was born. And when I came into this world, my parents, they brought us up. I have two brothers, Brandon and Grayson. They brought us up and raised us to understand, to see no color. And we had, these civil rights parents. We had a movement going on around us in the 70s. And my dad made us sit down and read this hate mail that he got. I mean, he would show us this box of hate mail to see what taking a stand was like. So I had great people raising me. And I grew up in this strong Christian home. My mother was devout Catholic. And so my mom's one of those moms that has a prayer plaque or a cross in every room in the house. You can't escape God in this woman's house. But something inside that little 9-year-old boy, when I was 9 years old, I came out and told my parents that my babysitter had been molesting me. And this is childhood sexual abuse back in the 80s. They didn't know as much about it back then as they do now. They didn't do as much about it. My parents went to the police, and the police were like, it's a female babysitter. Your son's a male. She's an adult, but there's really not anything we could do. But my parents did everything they could. They sent me to talk to a family counselor, a family priest, and we prayed about it. We prayed a lot. And but something inside the little 9-year-old boy went to a dark place, and prayer just wasn't going to get to me. And by the time I was 10, I started putting in chemicals to change the way I felt. Started sneaking my dad's beer out of the fridge. I started smoking cigarettes because my mom smoked, and I could steal her cigarettes and smoke them. By the time I was 12, I was smoking pot. So now I'm into criminal addictive behavior. Mm-hmm. But the worst part about this is I've got a bad belief system. And I tell people all the time, bad belief systems tell us to do something the wrong way over and over again. They become habitual. And here's the thing about bad belief systems is they're really hard to change. And bad belief systems usually win out in the end. They usually win. They're hard to change.
Right.
So my bad belief system at 10 and 12 years old was, I could do whatever I wanted to do. And all I'm doing is drinking a little beer, smoking a little pot. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not even hurting myself. But I was in the early stages of my disease of addiction. And addiction is built upon fears. Mm-hmm. And we talk, today that I'm in recovery, and recovery has been earth shattering for me. Recovery, my program of recovery today is the most important thing I have in my life.
Right.
And I know that for my recovery, that anything I put in front of my program of recovery, my wonderful life today, my wife, my career, if I put those things in front of my recovery, in front of God and my recovery, then I will lose them. And I know that because I've failed so completely in life. But in recovery, we learn about these fears and these fears that hold us back. And they talk about, in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about fear should be classified with theft because they steal so much from us.
Oh, yes.
Fears steal so much of our lives, our joy. And so I was living in all these fears. And, I went through life. I was a really good football player. I got a football scholarship to play at the University of North Texas. I played Division I college quarterback. But when I got to this point in my life that I call a fork in the road, and the fork in the roads in life are like, you get to a point where something's happened. The world has changed. You get hit so hard. And the world has changed, but when you get up at that fork in the road, you've got a choice to make. You're going to make the right choice, go the right way, or the wrong choice to go the wrong direction. And in front of you is what Viktor Frankl, I read a book by Viktor Frankl when I was in prison called Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about this thing called the existential vacuum. And your existence is wrapped up in this. And when I got hurt in college and couldn't play college football anymore, I got to this point in life, this fork in the road, where I made a lot of wrong choices.
Right.
But my bad belief system kicked in and my fears kicked in. And I didn't like the person who I was, that I wasn't playing football anymore. I put all my identity into being a football player. So now I put in the hardcore drugs, because that bad belief system of drinking a little beer, smoking a little pot, well, now it's cocaine, it's ecstasy, it's pills, you name it. And I go around living my life in fear, this adolescent fear of growing up, fear of what the world looks like without being an athlete attached to it. And so somehow I graduated college, Elizabeth. I graduated college in 1999. I moved to Washington. I worked in Congress. I worked for a guy running for president, Dick Gephardt, in 2004. And when Dick dropped out of the race in 2004, I moved back to Dallas, Texas, to train to be a stockbroker for one of the biggest Wall Street banks in the world, UBS, United Bank of Switzerland.
Right.
And it was at that job as a broker that I was introduced to methamphetamine for the first time. And meth was a game changer. It was, Elizabeth, it totally turned my life upside down. I tell people all the time, when I got introduced to meth, I went from working on Wall Street to living on the streets of Dallas.
Wow.
Oh
my gosh, that's such a scary statement. As you build all of that story, and there's so much more to it, really the pivotal moment is that young boy who was abused. And I hear this so often with people that recognize that, and sometimes they don't realize it till later. The fears that were put into you, the self-doubt, the lack of feeling worthy or whatever that was, affected all those decisions from then on. So that in itself really set you down a path, didn't it?
Yeah, and I tell people all the time, it wasn't one of those things, the sexual abuse thing wasn't one of those things where I look back and say, oh my God, this affected me so negative. I think the big thing that being sexually abused at that age, and it was a female babysitter. So I think what it did is it thrusted me into adult behaviors. It thrusted me into an adult world that I wasn't prepared for. What 9 or 10-year-old is prepared to look at the world as an adult? I don't have the mental capacity to do that. Right. I'm a child. But I started wanting to get into adult behaviors. That's why I'm drinking, because I see my dad drink his beers, or I'm smoking because my mom's smoking cigarettes. And I'm into sex. I'm having sex regularly by 12 years old. I'm into a world that 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you don't even need to be knowing anything about this world. Wow. But that's my world. And it affects every relationship I have in my life, Elizabeth, because every relationship I have is predicated upon sex. It's never predicated upon love. And right. Because love is reciprocal, and being in a relationship takes giving of yourself. I'm a selfish person at this point. I have no business being in a relationship. And it's not even until I get out of prison later on in the story, when I get into recovery and work the 12 steps with a sponsor, that I'm fully functional and able to be in a relationship, which is what I'm in today. Yeah. Because relationships take work on both sides. It takes the exchange of love, of commitment, compromise. Right. I didn't know that word.
Right. So everything you were seeing through this context, right, and making adult decisions at a young age, it's crazy. Now you have this career that from the outside, you had the political career. It from the outside, it looked pretty amazing. Like
Yeah.
you were going to be the guy. I mean, you could be running a presidential campaign this year now, had you been on that track. From the outside, you were making all these good decisions. You were doing the right thing. You get the job, the financial job. But on the inside, what are you feeling this entire time that is pushing you to make life-altering, damaging decisions in the dark that eventually come to light?
You know, that's a very good question, Elizabeth. And it's something that every addict knows this. You know, you live in these fears and you live in resentments. And what you want to do as an addict, you want to get out of yourself. You want to get outside of self. And that's what the drugs do for you. The drugs take you into a place where you're not having to feel anymore. And that's what we do as addicts. I say we, because I'm still an addict. I'm in recovery today. But we as addicts don't want to feel. We want to deaden that feeling. And that's why we put in the chemicals. And when I got into meth was a game changer for me, because meth, all of a sudden, it made me feel like I could get all these things done. And in the initial stages of using meth, you know, I'm up for days and I'm doing all these tasks and I'm getting everything done and it's looking good. But the reality is that I'm not living in reality anymore. And I'm living in this artificial world. It's this bubble. And when it pops, you know, I lose my job, I lose my home, my car, my savings account, and I'm living in all these dope houses and I've got no access to funds anymore, but I'm not done doing the drugs. So I've got this big addiction that's weighing on me. So I start getting into substance. I get into breaking into people's cars, breaking into people's storage units. And eventually I start breaking into people's homes, Elizabeth. And I mean, these burglaries that we did, they call them the uptown burglaries because they started in the uptown neighborhood of Dallas where I was living. These burglaries went on for 3 years. And let me tell you something, Elizabeth. One of the things that I got into in addiction that I learned a lot about, even before I got into recovery, was that the self-loathing. You know, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I felt bad about what I was doing to my victims. Because here's the deal, man. I didn't just steal my victims' property. You know, there was over $1 million worth of property stolen in the uptown burglaries. Elizabeth, I stole these people's sense of security. I don't know if they ever get that back. You know, anybody that's been the victim of a home invasion, a home burglary, you know what I'm talking about, because someone like me stole something from you that we had no business taking. Well, I had no business going into someone's home. I'm a homeowner today and I've got a family. I can't imagine if someone broke into my home. But I did that to people over and over again because I'm a selfish individual. I'm a selfish individual that lives in these fears. And a lot of these fears, and you talked about a while ago, these self-doubts, you know, I don't feel like I fit into society normally anymore. So everything I do in life seems to be, I do it full speed, good or bad. And so now I'm in this bad underworld of organized crime and I'm doing it full speed because that's what I identify with.
Well, you know that when you read about it in your book, you simultaneously are saying, I know I'm going to get caught. I know I'm going to get caught. As you read it, you feel this building towards, well, obviously we know eventually you do get caught, but it's like in the back of your mind as you're doing it, but you're going to all lengths. Like I'll never forget the story when the car was taken by the police and the lengths, I felt like I was watching or reading a movie, a TV show, a Cops and Robbers thing. Cause I mean, you break into a house to put the other car into the garage and I mean, really, Damon, amazing the lengths that you will go to. But the entire time, it was like this running tape I could hear in your mind saying, this is going to come to a crashing halt. And you say at one point, the best thing that happened to me was getting convicted, right? The best thing that happened to you was getting caught. Talk about that.
July 30th, 2008. You know, I'm sitting around this little rundown apartment in Dallas, and I've got this meth dealer named Tex sitting next to me on the couch. And I'm sitting there smoking this glass pipe with Tex. And I'm telling Tex, I think the end is near, man. I think the cops are going to come get me. 10 days before this guy I've been doing all these burglaries with, my partner in crime, my co-conspirator, a guy named Dustin, had been picked up by the Dallas Police Department. This is the same Dustin that you're talking about from the car scene. He had the stolen car that the police impounded and took from him, and I went and stole it back from the police, and the police impounded. Stole a car twice. But this is Dustin. Dustin is now picked up by the Dallas Police Department. They've got him in custody for 10 days already, and I know it's just a matter of time before they get to me. And just as I passed the pipe back to Tex, I heard a window shatter off to my right. You know, and tumbling across my living room floor was this little canister going end over end. And as I'm watching this canister bounce across my floor, it's like a slow motion reel from a movie, you know. And I lift up off the couch to get over this thing, and then bam, it blows up in my face. bright white light, loud noise, blows me back on the couch. And when I came to, when I can see and hear again, this cop in full SWAT riot gear, man, he's got his boot on my chest and the barrel of a machine gun is digging in my eye socket. And I can feel the barrel against my eyeball, Elizabeth. It's cold. And you talk about fear, man. I'm gripped. I'm paralyzed with fear. This cop is screaming at me, don't move, don't move. And man, all I could do was blink and just tell the guy, hey, man, don't worry, don't worry.
Yeah.
And the cops start flooding my apartment, and I could hear one of them say, we got it. We got the uptown burglar.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was a dramatic takedown. And, you know, looking back on that July 30th, 2008, the day that I was arrested, or as I tell people everywhere I go, that wasn't just the day I was arrested, Elizabeth. That was the day I was rescued.
Yeah.
You know, God got me out of a situation I could not get myself out of.
Right.
And there was no way then that I was thinking that would be a day I would celebrate for the rest of my life, because that was a rebirth. That was my birthday. That's my sobriety birthday. You know, in the 2 weeks when I go to my meeting, my recovery meeting, and get my 12-year chip, that's the day I celebrate now. I got taken in recovery at gunpoint. You know, I got taken in sobriety at gunpoint.
Wow. That
was the only way I was going. That's what we're talking. When you read the book, you can see the same building and building.
Oh, you can feel it.
I'm not stopping. You're going to have to take me down. And that serves you well as a person when you're ambitious and you're like an entrepreneur and you're just driven to succeed, and you're going to keep going. But it serves you terribly if you're doing something that's illegal and wrong.
That's right.
So, I mean, and so that world collided, that bubble bursted, and they threw me in a Dallas County jail, and I had no clue it was going to be the beginning of a life sentence.
Well, the beginning, not only of a life sentence, I mean, the sentence is incredible. That in itself is worthy of a long conversation, a 65-year sentence. But now you're starting to walk into something you have no clue what you're about to get into and what you're about to face. When you got convicted, that whole process, you tell a story of your mother, and my heart breaks for your parents, because I can just tell that they're salt of the earth people from reading the book and from you talking about them. And of course, you talk about the guilt of hurting them, but your mother comes in to see you for 5 minutes before they take you away after this unbelievable sentence of 65 years, which is a life sentence at that point. What does she say to you that really changes the eventual trajectory of how you do prison and how you do life now?
One of the most pivotal conversations of my life. I mean, my mom and my dad and my mom walk in, and my dad is stoic, man. He's in stunned disbelief. He just saw his son with all this promise in life get a life sentence in prison. And so he didn't really have anything to say. He's just frozen. But my mom's a nurse. She's a strong-willed Christian woman. She's a nurse. And so she's able to compartmentalize pain and deal with the situation at hand. And that comes in handy. And she says, hey, baby, she said, debts in life demand to be paid. She said, you just got hit with one hell of a bill from the state of Texas. She said, but Damon, you did the things they said you did at that trial, so you have to go pay that debt to society. She said, but you owe your father and I a debt too. She said, Damon, we gave you all the opportunity, love, and support to be anything you want to be in life, and this is how you repay us, what we saw in the courtroom. She said, it's not going to work. She said, so here's the debt you're going to pay to us. When you go to prison, you will not get in one of these white hate groups, one of these Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, because you're scared because now you're the minority. She said, it's not going to work. You were never raised to see race, and you won't start now. She said, you will not get any tattoos while you're inside that prison. And I mean, Elizabeth, I tell people all the time, I show on my sleeve.
Amazing.
I was there for almost 10 years in a maximum security penitentiary. These guys want to tattoo every inch of your body. Right. And every time they'd ask me, man, hey, Wes, let me put a tattoo on you. I'd be like, dude, I can't do it. My mom said no, you know? Wow. And so my mom told me that day, it was May 18th, 2009, when I got sentenced to life in prison. She told me that day, she said, no gangs, no tattoos. She said, you come back as the man we raised, or don't come back at all.
And that's not easy. That's not easy.
It's tough love from a mommy, but mother, wants to be in that position.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's something else. And I think, when someone hears that either hasn't read your story, it doesn't hear about what prison's like, it sounds like, okay, just make a choice not to be in a gang. The way you describe making that choice, sticking with that choice, surviving that choice, right? Your life was literally on the line because you said no. Time and time again, you were tested. What was it in you that allowed you to stick with that? Because it was really life-changing in the way you experienced prison, but you had to fight for that.
Yeah, I had to fight for that. But here's the thing, though, Elizabeth. I was raised in a way. I've always been a competitor. I've always been a fighter. And if I have set my mind to something, I'm going to do it. But fear, man, you talk about fear. Going into a maximum security prison You're on your own. I'm at the worst part of the prison system because I've got a life. 65 is life. And so everybody in the building I live on has a life. These are all lifers. I'm around murderers and rapists. And these are the worst of the worst. And the gangs run everything in there. And it's all about race. And so the white gangs first. And man, I've got to fight every day. They ask me to fight. They call me out to fight. And like Mr. Jackson, the guy I met in Dallas County Jail, told me, you don't have to win all your fights, but you do have to fight all your fights. Right. And that helped me to understand that because, if you're looking down the tunnel of trying to win fights and that's going to be your measuring stick, life's going to be tough. Life is like what Mr. Jackson said. He's talking about prison, but that's really about life. You don't have to win all your battles in life, but you have to get up and keep fighting. Every day you have to get up and keep fighting because you can't lay it down. And that's one of the things, Elizabeth, I've been a competitor all my life and I've been a fierce fighter and I just cannot stand to quit, to lay down because you know what? It gets hurt to get beat, whether it's physical, spiritual or mental to get beat down. But you know what hurts worse is quitting. It hurts worse to quit and lay down and just take it and let life roll you over. And so I wasn't made that way, but prison is a training ground because prison breaks a lot of very strong people. A lot of very strong people break under that pressure.
Yeah. Well, and again, you do such an amazing job, writing this and helping us experience it with you. But the Mr. Jackson story is a pivotal moment for you. And this is before you get to the maximum security part of your sentence, right? And this individual comes into your life probably just for this purpose. And as a result of this, everybody, of this experience that Damon's going to tell you about, we now have the blessing of the book, The Coffee Bean, which has changed lives. I know for one, I've read it to my children. We buy coffee bean bracelets. We talk about it. I want you to share with us that amazing, it's a short story, but it's amazing about attitude, about choices, about how you respond to the things that happen to you, because that is our only control, isn't it? How we choose to respond. So share that.
Right. And so Mr. Jackson is in Dallas County Jail with me. This is the 2 months I'm after my sentence and waiting for the prison bus to come get me. And every guy I talked to in that Dallas County Jail is telling me, man, you got to get into a gang. You have to get into a gang, man. It's all about race in there. And so Jackson pulls me aside one day and he's like, look, man, don't listen to these idiots, man. Keep that promise you made to your parents, to God, to yourself. Don't do this. He said, but let me tell you what it's going to be like. He said, because it's all about race, you got to fight all the white gangs first. Then if you survive that, he said, if you don't give in to their ideology of hate, the white gangs, out of fear. And he said, because we do a lot of things in life out of fear, Wes. Fear can make us see things that aren't real. And fear is really all like that, Elizabeth. They're like the boogeyman. Whenever you were a child and you thought there was a monster under your bed or in your closet, you never found that monster because it wasn't real. But as adults, we do the same thing. We create these fears that become giants and monsters, but they're not real. My co-author and good friend, speaking of the coffee bean, John Gordon talks about fear and faith all the time. And he said fear and faith both have more in common than just the letter F. They both believe in a future that hasn't happened yet. Yep. Fear is a negative one. Faith is a positive one. So that's kind of what Jackson's telling me. He's like, don't give in out of fear because fear is not real. He said, but then after you get done with the white gangs, you got to fight the black gangs. But here's the deal. He said, I want you to imagine prison as a pot of boiling water. And he said, anything we put in that pot of boiling water is going to be changed by the heat and the pressure inside that pot. He said, I'm going to put 3 things in that pot of boiling water. Let's watch how they change. A carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. And so he walked me through it. He said, a carrot goes into prison, the pot of boiling water. And he goes in there hard, but he turns soft because the water makes him soft. He said the carrot got beat, he got robbed, he got raped, then he may have gotten killed. He said, you don't want to be the carrot. Right. And he said, what about the egg? He asked me, what about the egg? And I said, well, the egg turns hard like a hard-boiled egg. And he said, that's right, Wes. He said, the egg has a shell which protects it physically, but inside, that soft liquid core is his heart. He said, your heart becomes hardened, Wes. You're incapable of giving or receiving love. And he said, if you're incapable of giving or receiving love, you've become institutionalized and you won't come back as someone your parents recognize because your eggshell will have swastikas tattooed all over it.
Wow. And
he said, what about the coffee bean? And I didn't know what happened to a coffee bean in boiling water, Elizabeth. I had no clue. And then Mr. Jackson said, if I put a coffee bean into that same pot of boiling water we call prison, he said, now you have to change the name of the water to coffee. Because he said the coffee bean, he said the smallest of these 3 things, he said small like you, West, had the power to change the entire atmosphere inside that pot. And he said everybody in life, Elizabeth, everybody in life puts out energy, negative or positive. He said whatever kind of energy you put out, you attract back. Yep. It's called the law of attraction.
That's right.
He said, so if you walk around prison all the time with a frown on your face, you want to look hard, you want to look tough, what you'll actually do is attract the toughest and hardest people to you because of the way you're portraying your energy. He said, but Wes, if you walk around that prison with a smile on your face and you let those guys know they're not getting to you. No, what they do, they can't get to you. Yeah. He said, you will change that prison from the inside out. And he said, the best part about it is the other coffee beans in prison, the other positive inmates, because there's going to be a lot of them in there. They'll find you because of your energy.
That's right.
And the last thing Mr. Jackson told me before I got on that prison bus, he said, Wes, go out there and go be a coffee bean.
There you go.
That's it. That was like the one of the most pivotal conversations in life. But I tell people all the time, Elizabeth, God didn't just ever reach down. In my experience of my life, I can only speak about my experiences. God has never reached down and said, hey, Damon, you're healed, man. Put his hand on my head. Damon, you're healed. It doesn't happen like that in the real world for me. What God has done in my life is he's put people in it. And these people, you meet along the road of life, they're going to be there to get you from one stage to the next. And Mr. Jackson was certainly one of those people. But you have to be open to that, Elizabeth. You have to be receptive to that. You have to be open to what the universe is putting in your path. Because if you're not, because if I'm closed off as a white 33-year-old male that's come from a middle-class background, and I meet this guy, this Jackson, and Jackson's not his real name. He's a Muslim guy. His name is Muhammad, man. But I call him Mr. Jackson because it's easier to tell the story in America instead of saying Muhammad told me this and Muhammad told me that. Yeah. But if I get turned off because this is a black Muslim man in his 60s that's been in and out of the system all his life, he's the antithesis of what Damon West is before he gets into the life of crime. If I say, hey, you don't look like me, you don't come from the same background as me, what can you tell me? I missed the biggest and most important lesson of my life, what got me through the hardest time in my life. Yep. And not only that, but I'm not able to give that message out to the world like I am today.
That's right.
So we have to be receptive.
We have to be receptive, and we would have missed out on that. See, that's what people understand, that purpose is about affecting someone else, and then that person affects someone else. And there were more people than Mr. Jackson. I remember in the prison you talk about, I can't remember her name, but she was in the chapel, and she told you something like, if you're going to pray, don't doubt, and if you doubt, don't pray. She had a few things, right? Who was that?
Miss D Doucette. Yeah. Miss D was a little 84-year-old. She was a prison chaplain volunteer. She would come in there and volunteer her time. She was a retired lady. And I went. This is during the first couple of months of prison. I'm thinking about killing myself. I'm fighting all the time, and I'm telling Ms. D one Saturday morning right before Catholic Mass is that I can't do this anymore. I can't do this forever. And she said, you can't kill yourself. My mom had told me in Dallas County Jail. She said, look, get on God's back like in Footprints of the Sand. Get on God's back, let God carry you. And so Ms. D is reiterating that. And I said, I told her, I said, but Ms. D, I'm doubting God, Elizabeth, because how could God create a place so dark and evil and perverse as prison? I mean, this place, I'm telling her about the stuff that goes on, the rapes, and she hears all that. She knows all that. And she's like, Damon, it's not your place to doubt God. She said, but the Bible is full of people that have doubted God, but got back to their faith. She said, here's the deal about faith. And there's a very important lesson. She said, if you're going to pray, don't worry. God's got it, right? Yeah. But if you're going to worry, don't pray. She said, you can't have it both ways. She said, and the last time you took over this thing, the last time you drove the car, you parked it inside of a prison. So choose, but choose wisely. So if you're going to pray, don't worry. And if you're going to worry, don't pray. And that's what we do in recovery all the time. In recovery, we talk about, letting go and letting God. We talk about being powerless over our disease of addiction. And we have to trust a higher power. And that's what it is in life, because we've got all these fears. We're human beings. We're made up of fears, of resentments. Yeah. And these things hold us back so much in life. Fears and resentments. My entire life is a long list of fears and resentments that, honestly, I think, Elizabeth, that every person on the planet should have to work the 12 steps by the second grade in life. I mean, because we'd be a much better place for it.
I agree with you. Absolutely. It's an amazing program when you look at it. You don't have to be an addict. I think that watching you or reading about your journey through prison, and you get to a point too where you say something, I'm going to paraphrase it, where God said to you, if it's to be, it's up to me, meaning he will do it. And so I know you entered some fights even like that, I think, or just some, altercations or things that you needed to survive. So you were making these choices along the way to lean on him. It's so much bigger. You're facing a fear, but not saying Damon has to do this. Like, God, you're going to have to show up or I'm done. Like, without that higher power, without God, you couldn't do it on your own.
I learned a very important lesson. When I talk to people or talk to audiences all the time about being a coffee bean and the 5 steps about being a coffee bean, one of them is that I got from a recovery meeting in prison. I got into recovery. in 2011 in prison. And we started these meetings off with this thing called the serenity prayer. And the serenity prayer goes, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So here's fear in a nutshell, Elizabeth. So that we go into the meeting that day, and the guy that brings the meeting, and I call him Ray in the book, he draws a line from one side of the chalkboard to the other. And he said, that line, Damon, represents God's line. And he said that God's line is infinitely long. He said, I'm going to diagram the serenity prayer for you. He said, God's line is infinitely long. It's bigger than that chalkboard. And he said the first part of the prayer, he said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. He said, the things you cannot change, Damon, are on God's line. And he said, every time you try to touch something off of God's line, you hurt yourself and you hurt other people. Stop trying to play God. Then he went and erased a little inch out of that line. And he held his fingers up an inch apart in front of the whole group to see. And he said, if God's line is infinitely long, then your line's to scale. You get 1 inch of that big long line. And he said that 1 inch line is called humility, because he said humility is defined as being right sized, because only when we're right sized do we know our place in the world and what we're there to do. You hit on the wall and go, we're here to serve other people. The secret to life is called servant leadership, right? And so we're trying to find ways to serve other people, because we have to trust that if we're doing what God needs us to do every day, then God's going to take care of our needs too. But he said that little 1 inch line is called humility. He said, and on that little 1 inch line, he says the second part of the prayer, the courage to change the things I can.
Right.
Here's where you're getting over fear. He said, the things you can change, the things that God gives you to work on, there's 4 of them on this little line. He said, the 4 things you can change, the 4 things you control are what you think, what you say, what you feel. And he said, most importantly, everybody's going to see what you do.
That's right.
What you think, what you say, what you feel, what you do.
Amen.
He said, if it's not one of those 4 things, you don't control it. And he said, the last part of the prayer was the most important for us addicts and a lot of people, is the wisdom to know the difference between the big line and the little line. There's a chapter in my book, The Change Agent, called Not on My Line, because I have to remind myself so many times a day, Damon, that's not on your line. This coronavirus stuff, everything that's going on in the world right now, not on my line.
Not on your line.
But how I respond to it is on my line.
That's right.
And what I'm going to do today, okay, the world has changed. I have to change with it. And I have to look for these opportunities. And that's where you eliminate fear and you start saying, okay, yes, this is bad. Things have changed. But what's the opportunity here? Because there's going to be an opportunity inside of every dark, tragic, adverse situation that we're in. There is an opportunity, and we have to dig around to find it, sometimes in the dark. But when you grab it, hold onto it, pull it, and make the most of it.
Well, your life is a testament to that, for sure, right? To finding opportunity in darkness. And there's so much more to the story, but I want you to fast forward to getting out, because obviously you're sitting here talking to me today. So someone right now is going, what's happened to the 65 years? What's that all about? Give them kind of the short version of how you got to the point. And the way I have to tell you, Damon, the way I saw it when I was reading is that God was working on you. And then at the right time, it was time for you to be released, and in the timing that was perfect. But what happened that allowed you to finally, after what was it, how many years? 10 years?
7 years and 3 months.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
7 years and 3 months to get out and to, be able to be paroled.
Yeah. So I hit on it at the very beginning of our conversation today, is that, the parole board, they're looking at my file and I'm up for parole. I'm eligible, but I think I'm going to do about 10 or 15 years, because that's what you do in a life sentence. But they're like, look, we don't see a lot of people come through like you. Your background, and not only that, but what you've been able to do is you've been in prison. You've changed yourself and you changed the prison around you. And that's when the lady said, I just got one question for you. If you could be remembered for being anything in this life, she said, give it to me in just one word, go. And my answer was useful. I just want to be useful. I told her I can be useful in here, or I can be useful out in that world, finding those coffee beans. And they let me go. And it was whenever I got out of prison that I started to really see God's hand in everything. I mean, God got me out of prison. There's no doubt. God opened that door. Nobody but God could do that. And it's almost like when I'm walking out, the day I'm walking out to my parents' car, is that God's tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, look, dude, I just put you through this for a reason. You're going to work for me now. And as long as you're working for me and you know that this is my show and not the Damon show, you're going to be okay. But turn around and check this out, because this is where you come when it becomes about you. Ego. Oh. Yeah, you got to avoid that stuff. So, and I got out and doors started opening up for me left and right. Elizabeth, I wanted to go out. I wanted to start talking and sharing my story. So I started going in this area of Texas where I live, but I really wanted to get in the college football scene, because I've got, I played Division I quarterback. I've got this great story, but I don't know any college football coaches. This is talking about fear. Right. And it's a story I share with companies and corporations and salespeople all the time. It's called never be afraid to ask the question. Always ask the question. So I get a buddy of mine calls me in January 2017. He's a Houston media guy. He's got an extra press pass to the Bear Bryant Coach of the Year award. The Bear Bryant Coach of the Year, they're going to name the top head coach in the country every single year in Houston. And this night in January, they've got the 8 best college football coaches in America.
Yeah.
And he's going to sneak me in the back door of the Toyota Center and give me a press pass. You know, he said, and I live 90 miles away. He said, do you want to come? I was like, heck yeah. So I throw my best hand-me-down suit on. I'm only out of prison 14 months. I got hand-me-down clothes. Throw my best hand-me-down suit on. I drive to Houston, get the press pass, and I hit the ground running. I get to meet these coaches, Wisconsin, Penn State, USC, all these big schools are there. And every single coach that I'm pressing the flesh with and meeting that night, I'm giving them my little elevator pitch, and it's a terrible elevator pitch. So, because I'm just nervous and I'm talking. You know, like you can see I talk fast already. And so every coach I meet is slamming the door in my face. They're telling me no. And they're not just coming out and saying no, but they're saying, yeah, great story. Don't call us, we'll call you. How about that? Yeah. You know, I'm 7 to 8 coaches down, you know, and I feel like I've gotten my butt kicked for 4 quarters out there. I'm 7 to 8 coaches down. I'm in the corner of the Toyota Center, away from everybody else. I'm licking my wounds, and I'm thinking about just leaving before I talk to that last coach. But then that competitor voice kicked in. It's, you know, hey, man, you want to be a motivational speaker. What kind of motivational speaker quits, right? And you survive prison, man. You survive way worse than this. That last coach is going to tell you no tonight before you leave, but you're going to make him tell you no.
Yeah.
So I watched and I stalked, and I waited for the opportunity to pounce on Dabo Swinney. And Dabo saw me coming, and I've got Dabo pinned up against the wall. To this day, Dabo will tell you it was 10 minutes of conversation in 1 minute, you know?
Yeah.
And at the end of that, you know, Dabo's like, you got a card on you? And I reach out and give him my card. He goes, great, we'll be in touch. And I'm like, another no. But I left it all on the field that night, and I felt good about it, Elizabeth. I drove home that night, and I forgot all about that. Forgot all about it. You know, I went 0 for 8, but at least I tried, you know? I gave it my best. 4 months later, I get an email from the director of football operations at Clemson, a guy named Mike Dooley. And he says, hey, Coach Swinney said he met you at an award show in Houston. He'd love to have you come talk to the team. How's August 1st? Do you have August 1st open? What? Man, do I got every first open, dude. I got nothing going on, man. So, August 1st, 2017, I talked to the Clemson Tigers, the defending national champions in college football. And when I get done with my presentation, Dabo's got me up against the wall. He's like, that's the most amazing story I've ever heard. He said, have you been to Alabama yet? I'm like, no, Dabo, I've been to Clemson, man. How am I going to go to Alabama?
Oh, my God.
He said, well, I just text Nick Saban from the back of the room. We'll see what happens next.
Wow.
When I landed in Houston the next morning, I've got a voicemail and a text message from the director of football operations at at Alabama. It says, we'll see you at University of Alabama. We'll see you in Tuscaloosa in 3 weeks. Just like that, Dabo kicked the door open. That's 2017. 2018, I'm at my desk at work, and I get a phone call. And on the other end of the phone, it's this guy named John Gordon. And John Gordon, huge motivational speaker.
Who's that? John Gordon. Who's that?
I follow John Gordon. He's got hundreds of, he's sold 4 million.
Amazing.
Energy best guy is calling me on my phone, and I'm like, if you're John Gordon, how do you even know who I am? He said, He said, Dabo Swinney. He said, Dabo can't quit talking about you and that coffee bean story. He said, Damon, let's write a book. We'll call it The Coffee Bean. He said, this book will be sold. It'll go all over the world. The world needs a coffee. This is last year. He says, the world needs a coffee bean message, Damon. And the book came out. It became a bestseller. And all of this is because of sticking around to ask that one question to Dabo Swinney that night. Because if I'd have just left that night and let those fears consume me and didn't ask that one question to Dabo Swinney, then you don't know Damon West. You don't have the coffee bean story. You don't even know who I am. But the world is different today because of having the courage to get past those fears and ask that question.
That's right. And God knew we needed the coffee bean, because this time last year when you were celebrating the release of the coffee bean, who would have thought what we were facing now, and that we need to manage how we react to situations that we cannot control. And you talk about a message now in 2020 about what you cannot control. I mean, we can't control any of this, only our reaction to it. As Ray said, right? That little tiny line.
That's it. That little tiny line. And we are definitely in a pot of boiling water right now. And I will leave you with one last story about fear and overcoming fear. In the 1920s, there were 2 cereal companies in America. There was Post and there was Kellogg's. All right. Post was a giant. They were a juggernaut. Kellogg's was a real small cereal company. But in October of 1929, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. And Post when that happened, they quit doing the things that made them great and started living in fear. And when they lived in fear, they stopped doing radio ads. They stopped doing marketing. They quit reinventing themselves with new cereals. They fired a lot of people. Kellogg's looked at it differently. They saw the opportunity. They saw what Post was doing. They saw the opportunity. They put all their money to the middle of the table. They put more money in marketing, more money in radio. They invented a new cereal during that time called Raisin Bran, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of Raisin Bran?
Yeah, of course.
And by 1933, 4 years into the Great Depression, Kellogg's overtook Post as the biggest cereal company in America, and they have never looked back since.
Wow.
And that's what fear will do to you. Fear will cripple you, paralyze you, and it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be that way.
Wow, Damon, I couldn't end that better. I mean, I could talk to you for another hour, but that's an amazing way to end this. I am just so in awe of what you've been able to do with your life. And I know your humility leads you, and I really just honor you for that. It's incredible. I want you to share with people what's next for you, because of course, with COVID, things have been kind of off, but I think you're writing another book. And can you just share how people can get more of you? And you're amazing on social media. So that too, we need to make sure.
Oh yeah. For social media, follow me at Damon West 7 on Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah.
Another book coming out in November. John Gordon and I have just finished The Coffee Bean for Kids.
Nice.
So it's, now with the changing world and in school, and we're talking about changing school systems and everything else, we thought we need to have a book for kids. We need to have a book for kids, children, to understand a changing world, but they have the power to be that coffee bean too. And they can start coffee bean clubs at their schools, just like the kid in the book, the coffee bean does. So the Coffee Bean for Kids will be out in November. I'm working on the continuation of the Change Agent. Right. There's a lot of stuff to report in that book about what's going on in my life since I submitted the manuscript for the Change Agent. So, I mean, all the way up to, COVID-19 and then a movie deal. The Lionsgate's making it's going to be a Netflix original series. It'll be 8 to 10 episodes. But all that stuff's on hold right now because of COVID. But here's the deal, man. COVID has knocked the legs out from a lot of us, but we have to find ways to move forward. And so during this time, I've moved from being a physical speaker to a virtual speaker. And I've, it wasn't an easy transition. It was very hard. And I've lost a ton of money with COVID, and everybody's feeling pain from it. Yeah. But I can't sit there and focus on what I've lost. I have to look, I have to be grateful for the things I have and the opportunities I have. I look at every day as an opportunity, man. This is my opportunity. Yeah. And I'll stop with this prayer that I say every morning that I learned in recovery. And I say it every day. It's the only thing I pray for, Elizabeth. Yeah. I say, hey, God, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you, and let me recognize it when I see it. And I don't ask for anything else, because if I'm doing what God needs me to do, then He'll take care of my needs. Maybe not my wants, but my needs. That's a whole different podcast, wants and needs. Yeah. But yeah, you can find me at Damon West 7. If you'd like me to, my website, damonwest.org. My books are available on Amazon, The Change Agent, The Coffee Bean for Kids, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold.
And so much more coming. I mean, we're going to be watching you with such excitement, and I'm just honored that my community was able to hear from you. You've definitely just changed a life, at least one, and that's what it's all about. And I know many more than that. And thank you for encouraging all of us to really be significant and to be purposeful and to be useful. That is what it's all about. Damon, I honor you. I salute you. What can I say? Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for the opportunity to be useful. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon, Damon.
Talk to you. All right. Bye-bye.